What a palaver. Testing, testing, 1 2 1 2 1 2. Am I live now? I've got my friend Robert who's telling me whether or not I'm live on YouTube. Yeah, I know. You will in a second. I think there's a bit of a delay. How's that? Back again? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow. Okay, we're back now. It won't be the last time something like this happens. Why is it always me? I mean, nothing went wrong there. The camera image was perfect. The OBS connection was perfect. The internet connection was perfect. I'm so annoyed. Anyway, I'm going to get back to that question about Alonso, and I was going on about how Alonso is very like Max Verstappen. Sorry, Alonso. Here we are. Alonso is very like Seve Ballesteros. I think, however, for one lap, qualifying lap, I think Max probably has it over Fernando, and that's partly because Max is so good at those pole laps now. He just is so good, and Red Bull have taken him to that level of operation, and he's so good anyway. And partly because I don't think Fernando's the fastest qualifier in the world. I've said that a few times already in a couple of YouTube vids this year. I don't think he got the best from the car in Bahrain or at the last race in Australia. And I think that's partly because he's a little bit reactive in the way he drives compared with Max. And if things aren't absolutely perfect on that set of new soft tyres he's running in Q3, he'll tend to have a bit of a lock up or run a bit wide, whereas Max tends to be able to live with those moments even before they've happened, to manipulate them. I've got another important WhatsApp coming in, probably just telling me about the stream, I hope. Can it be a camera auto switch off? No, the camera's on, so there you go. Hopefully everything's working now. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people tell me if it isn't. Anyway, that's that. And I think the final thing is in the wet. I think Max is probably slightly better in the wet. I'm not saying Fernando's not brilliant, but I think Max is I think he's one of these great off the racing line, finding the grip drivers. And although Fernando is that also, I think that Max has a slightly softer initial brake pedal input, and that'll help him in the wet compared with Fernando, as indeed it showed up when Fernando was alongside Lewis. So in terms of the fight between the two, Max versus Alonso, I would say Alonso's going to win it if it's the last 10 laps and the car's falling apart. That's what I would say. Otherwise, I think it'll be Mr. Perfect, Max Verstappen. No, nothing wrong with Max at all. He's brilliant. No audio, man. Yeah, I knew that. Guess who's back? Well, I'm back. We're back. Back, no audio. That's because I hadn't plugged in the audio, actually, because I had to get up. Now I've lost the exposure. Now I'm going to make sure it's back on my face. Oh, so many things. I mean, when I'm doing it recorded, it's so much easier. Anyway, here we go. Can't hear you, can't hear you, can't hear you. Yeah, I know all that. Right, get to a new one. Or am I the old one? Am I the old one, or is this a new one? Red Bull should have picked up Hulkenberg in 21 instead of Checo. Well, dare I say, couldn't agree with you more, because I think I'm absolutely shocked at Checo's reaction to what happened in Saudi Arabia, where he won the Grand Prix. I'm absolutely shocked that after that race, he started saying, I'm in the running for the World Championship. I need to get the same treatment as Max. If indeed he said that, I still find it hard to believe he did. I'm sort of quoting third hand, but that's what people tell me he said. And I'm still even more shocked that he's thrashing out at the team now because of what happened in qualifying and indeed in FP3 in Melbourne. Dry track, no problem at all with the car, obviously. So, I think Red Bull are surprised by that, because they imagined he would be just this guy who is very, very quick, very polished in a lot of areas, not as quick as Max overall, obviously, who would be quite happy to be in, if you like, the second best car in Formula One, and at this stage of his career, and would just keep his mouth shut and get on with it. But he's not doing that, oddly. It seems he's got a case of the Rubens Barrichellos or the Felipe Massas when they were at Ferrari. And, life can be better, or Eddie Irvine's for that matter. Life can be better if I was number one. And of course, that's a load of old rubbish. And that's really disappointing to see. But hopefully he'll get through that, and he'll just. Well, I suspect he will. But yeah, you know, you're right. I don't think Nico Hülkenberg would be doing anything like that if he was at Red Bull. I think he's got a very stable mental approach to racing, and I think he's got an enormous talent. And yeah, he for sure would be a really, really good teammate for Max. And at this stage, you've got to say probably quicker than Daniel. Although, you know, give Daniel his due. If you put him in a really good race car and you give him a bit of testing and a bit of racing and he's there, I would say within a couple of races he'd be right there as well. Because the car is that nice, and it would invite all those things out of Daniel that he wasn't able to use at Renault or McLaren. And so, yeah, I think Daniel would obviously do a very good job, and this time around would know his place, as it were. It sounds a bit condescending to say that, but I think if he got another chance at Red Bull, he would say, right, I ain't going to blow this one. You know, if it means being number 2 to Max and we cross the line side by, you know, nose to tail, so be it. Because he'll win some for sure. And I think Nico, yeah, I think they made a mistake. You can only imagine that. I don't think Nico's ever been a Red Bull driver, has he? Or has he? I don't know. I don't think he has at any stage of his career, which is odd, really, isn't it? I suppose it's because he came up through A1GP and maybe, you know, slipped through the system. Maybe it's that. Maybe. I don't know. It's an odd one that he hasn't been a Red Bull driver. And they probably would have been better off, for sure. So we got lots of people telling me there's no sound, but hopefully we got sound now, right? I'm just going to go back and check that the volume levels are okay. Yeah, they're moving around, as they should. Not sure about the lighting at the moment. It's all a bit hit and miss, isn't it? Still no audio. Hello, good afternoon. This is from Newton Heath, LYR Football Club. I suppose I should know what LYR is. Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Peter Windsor live chat. It's lights out and away go. Oh, well, thank you for that. Yeah, we have you. That shirt is really nice. Thank you very much. This shirt is made by Peter Hill, who owns Globe. And Peter's a really cool guy. He's done 1 million days with Rob Wilson. Very good club racer in his own right. And Globe make lots of cool stuff, as you well know. And this is one of his shirts, so thank you very much. Robert Waterman, my buddy, saying the sound is fine, so that's good. Yeah, so thank you very much. That's Globe, Peter Hill, mega. And Peter Hill is working closely. He's such a fan of Rob Wilson that he's working closely with Rob on the vest that Rob is creating with the sensors in it that would enable you to go out and drive the Fernando Alonso lap or the Max Verstappen lap or the Kimi Raikkonen lap or the Lewis Hamilton lap of any given circuit with pulses or whatever you want, head-up display showing, no, that's not what Fernando would have done, that's what Fernando would have. And that's the vest they have, which Porsche use a lot already, developing with Rob and Peter Hill. So, mega. Give Peter a chance, guys. I think they were, weren't they? I don't think anyone was being really tough. They were just saying you can't, you know, good to go. Can't read lips, so I'm out of here. I think, you know, people do have a relatively short fuse, short attention span, but I think they come back as well, don't they? I don't know. Audio's in and out now. I hope not. You're good. Live and hear you. Good. Daniel, thank you very much. Daniel, DMA, Harry, all these lovely, nice people who are saying everything's good. Radio check, Darshan, Pithadia, done, Team Radio, Auto is back, Audio's back. It's just like Team Radio, isn't it? It works. Ryan E, it works. Lots of thumbs up. Yeah, not going to be much radio in Monaco. Possibly Baku is going to be a bit of an issue as well with radio as well. Nothing much they can do about all those built-up walls and areas. Monaco is usually the worst circuit. Loud and clear, loud and clear. A lot of people saying loud and clear. Lots of thumbs up. Thank you very much, everyone, for all that. Now let's get down to some questions. Let's give Peter a red flag or something. I don't know what's that all about. Had plenty of red flags in my life, that's for sure. So now I'm going up to the where we were. It jumps around a bit, doesn't it? So it's quite good, though. I'm quite impressed with the whole YouTube thing. Are you ready, Peter? Low? Yeah, I am, I think, hopefully. Third-party drama. DRS range internet connection. Max is a better driver in the wet than Alonso, says Shanky. Yeah, I'd go for that. As I say, I think I think one of Max's great qualities is that felt braking touch that he has, which you see in telemetry data as braking early, but that's only a tenth of the real story of what he's actually doing when he's in theory braking and Checo's still flat on the throttle. He's not just braking early. He's actually at that moment he's shortening the corner and he's modulating the brakes against steering load to get absolute perfection in terms of managing all the dynamic weight. Sounds complicated, but that's actually what he's doing. And yeah, and that really helps you in the wet, obviously. YouTube's fault. Happens a lot. Even old vids. Oh, well, that's good to know. Yeah, because what happened to me there never happened on Twitch, I got to say. On Twitch a few times, I lost the camera, or I lost, I don't know, the feed, I guess. But I never lost, with the camera working and the feed working and the internet perfect, I never lost the picture. So yeah, it could happen again, in which case, I don't think there's a way of fixing it other than to do what I did, which was close the stream down. I tried rebooting the connection to the camera and it didn't seem to make any difference. Anyway, I'm pleased we got it going again. So DMA Harry, Peter, what's your take on all the new Formula One fans hating Lewis Hamilton? Well, my take is I didn't know they did. And do they? I keep, sorry, got to get the exposure right again. Seems to be, it's when I look down a bit, isn't it? Sorry about that. There we got the exposure again. Yeah, one hears all the time about the Netflix generation and what that's done for Formula One. It's taken to the whole new generation. So when you say new Formula One fans, I'm assuming you mean the Netflix generation all hate Lewis Hamilton. Well, having never watched Netflix for anything, let alone Formula One, and I'll explain why in a second. I can only assume it comes from that, does it? Does he not get a great press from Netflix? Because there is absolutely no reason in the world to hate Lewis Hamilton. There's no reason to hate anything in the world, in my view. It's a terrible word, hate. And I hope that's not really true. I can't imagine hating Lewis Hamilton. Why? I mean, he's a very, very good person, I think. The Lewis I know is a very good person, does a lot of stuff away from the cameras that come under the heading of being a true human being. And so what else is there to hate about the guy? I mean, well, what is there to hate about him? Sorry, is what I meant. And as for not watching the stuff, the Netflix stuff, it's not because I'm necessarily against it. And those who've been reading my columns in F1 Racing over the years will know that I've been banging the drum about how Formula One should do a much better job of showing what goes on when they get out of the car in the debrief rooms and in the paddock area and the drive back to the hotel and in the hotel perhaps and in the driver's briefing. And to some extent, as I understand it, the Netflix show does that. But the reason I don't watch it is the same reason I don't watch Formula One movies. It's because I have my own life that I've led in Formula One, and my brain is not big enough to be able to take in other people's opinions of what happened or their view of how it happened. The only way I can kind of live my life is to be living the life that I know and as I knew it happened. So if somebody ever wants to ask me about Niki Lauda's accident at the Nürburgring in '76 or what happened with the drivers' strike in South Africa, things like that, I can always bring up my own memories and talk about it. But I just have this fear that if I watch too much of this other stuff, it'll start to impregnate my brain. And because I say my brain's not that big anyway, and I'll have an odd perspective which I wouldn't then be able to cope or justify or understand. Anyway, that's why I don't watch any of that stuff. Anyway, there's no time. I mean, after this, what are we going to do? I'm going to be watching the US Masters, round 3 on day 4, because of the weather. So I can't express any other view than I think if you hate Lewis Hamilton, I feel sorry. I don't feel sorry for you. I just feel sorry that situation has arisen because it shouldn't. He's a really, really good guy, nice guy. And if you bump into him in the street and he's not surrounded by all these guys and you ask him a nice question about karting or motor racing or whatever, he'll chat and he'll have a good response. So I like Lewis a lot. I like Max. I like Fernando. I can't say I don't like any of the drivers at all. I think they're all amazing people. And that goes for engineers and mechanics. I mean, some of them are different from others, but as for hating them, it's a terrible thing, isn't it? That's come up probably through social media, that there's this sort of polarization of hating and liking. And sorry, I'm just dipping in and out of WhatsApp because I just want to make sure that. This is from my buddy Cameron, who's a really good guy. Peter, you forgot to turn on super chats for your live. Oh well, we'll do it next time. I think super chats involves money, doesn't it? I'm not very good with money, I'll tell you. But Cameron's got a heart of gold as well. Anyway, there you go. Lewis Hamilton, don't hate him. He's a good guy. Iceman says Charles is better in qualifying over 1 lap. Now, you're probably responding to better than Max, maybe you're saying? He wasn't better in qualifying in Melbourne, was he, than Carlos Sainz? But, and here's, I think you raise an interesting point, Iceman, and anybody who's watching, this is quite an all-embracing response here, and I think it's quite significant for where we're at Ferrari right now. In Q3, Charles was quite annoyed in Melbourne that he didn't get any sort of tow or help from Carlos Sainz. And it would have been only on, I guess, on the finishing straight. I don't think there's anywhere else in Melbourne you can get any help at all. And he didn't get any help from Carlos. We'll park that for a second. And I thought it was odd that he made that public, or made that he was upset about that, because, you know, you've got to live in your own world and you've got to be very cocooned when you're at Ferrari. You've got your guys and you've got to work in a very apolitical way. So it was quite a political reaction I think he had to it all. Then we get back to the point of not being helped by Carlos Sainz in qualifying. Yeah, but, you know, to me, even if Charles felt that Carlos was in a position to help him, I think it's quite naive of him to think that Carlos would. Why would Carlos Sainz help Charles Leclerc any more than Charles would help Carlos, really? I mean, maybe he would, because he doesn't really ever see Carlos as a true threat. But Carlos Sainz has just come off a very good Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. He's done pretty well so far over the Australian Grand Prix weekend. Above all, he just wants to out-qualify Charles Leclerc. I mean, to think that Carlos is then going to try and help Charles with a tow I think, was a bit naive. And I'm surprised that Charles even allowed that sort of thought to come into his head, because it's unlike him, actually, to think that way. He's always been, you know, Charles Leclerc will get out and do this job. And I think partly because of that, I think that's why he didn't qualify very well. And didn't have a terrible race, didn't he? I mean, and we all know what happened in the race, and that's part of not qualifying well. It's majorly not qualifying well. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic of what's going on at Ferrari right now. And if I was managing Charles Leclerc, I'd be saying to Charles right now, the best thing you can do is to have a great relationship with Carlos Sainz, because you might need him as the season goes on. You are quicker, don't worry about that, but you might need him. The last thing you need is to draw any sort of rift between you two. And right now, Carlos Sainz is hurting badly because of the ridiculous penalty he was given at the final restart in Melbourne. So the best thing you can do is actually get on his bandwagon and sympathise with him and go along with how ludicrous that penalty was, and just put your arm around him a bit. That's what I would say if I was managing Charles. I doubt that's happening. I suspect the gap is going to be even wider as we get to Baku between the two. But I'm just saying that's the way I would have handled it. You know, and I'm a guy that worked with quite a difficult driver at times, Nigel Mansell, and there were several occasions when I had to say things like that, and did say things like that to Nigel, with his relationship with Keke mainly, not so much Nelson, but certainly with Keke. And I'm surprised that it's got that way, particularly as the Ferrari isn't yet a race-winning car, and you know, the time to have any sort of drama within the team maybe would be if they were both potentially going to win the Grand Prix and in the running for the World Championship. But at this level, where Ferrari are at the moment, I find it really odd that Charles had such a bad weekend in Melbourne, and partly it was due to that annoyance he had with Carlos. And yeah, I've got massive respect for both of those drivers in different ways, And I hope Charles, gets it together now, and somebody is there saying, look, focus on your own weekend. Let's just make this happen now. And he's always been good around Baku. So let's see what happens. So that was that. Thank you, Iceman. Led on to quite a lot. Daniel Gold, Max is the best, and George excellent too, says Daniel Gould. Yeah, and we don't talk about George. We haven't talked about George so far in the stream, but yeah, isn't he excellent? I mean, he's absolutely stunningly quick. I don't think he has the margin. I don't think, because he doesn't manage the weights quite as well as Max and Lewis, and to some extent Charles, I don't think he's got quite the margin of error as a result that those three have. And I think for George to do the lap, he's absolutely on the edge. The Jochen Rindt, Ronnie Peterson, Ayrton Senna edge with no margin. And that's great, so long as he doesn't make any mistakes. I think that's the only thing I'd say about George. He's really, really quick. But his corners are slightly longer than Lewis's. You can see it when they're together, which means that he's leaving a little bit of margin there, I guess. But in order to be quick, he then has to brake really late, and he has to be absolutely pin sharp perfect with where he's positioning the car going into the corner. Yeah, but George is excellent. Absolutely, no doubt about it. Bonchov 009. I talked to your mechanics and there was nothing wrong. Sorry, every time I bend down now, it's pretty clear, isn't it? The exposure goes. So there I am. I'm back again. And there was nothing wrong, but we know how you are. Okay. Luke Noonan says, Peter, understand your argument. If you have a Lewis Hamilton, you don't need a George Russell. Is there a merit to a Darwinsic approach to the sport where a driver's teammate shouldn't matter? Yeah, absolutely there's merit to that. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It's part of the team, and some drivers are not as fast as others. And if that driver who's a little bit slower can mold his talent into being incredibly consistent, very mechanically sympathetic, very patient, and incredibly organized, then you've got a priceless commodity, because every team really wants a driver like that. We're talking Nico Hülkenberg, Daniel Ricciardo, Valtteri Bottas when he was at Mercedes, Carlos Sainz maybe, yeah, and a few others. And it's not easy to play that role, because the ego within the athlete does what it did to Daniel Ricciardo or Felipe Massa or Rubens Barrichello. And all the clamoring noise of the social media, which is presumably one of the things going on with Sergio Perez at the moment, tells you that you're good enough to win a Grand Prix, you're good enough to be world champion, you've got to have treatment, they're not giving you the same car, all that stuff. And that's where the art comes in. It's closing your mind to all that and shutting your ears off and being the Francois Sever to Jackie Stewart. And that's not easy. And Sever, you could argue, would be in many ways the best example of that, because he was completely happy and ready to be number 2 to Jackie Stewart and to learn everything he possibly could from Jackie Stewart. And when the moment came, he was ready to take over in that team, not to leave and go and be a number 1 somewhere else. And that's a very organic way of doing it. Very sadly and tragically, as we know, he never got to do that. But he was poised to carry on, really, where Jackie had left off. And so, yeah, it's a very important thing. And, Michael Schumacher, obviously there are negatives to Michael, but we should never underestimate how bright Michael was in that whole Ross Brawn, Jean Todt era, which was, if you want me to win Drivers' and Constructors' World Championships, you're going to have to enable me to score the maximum points on any given day. And I don't need a teammate who's going to take points away from me. And his philosophy is right. If you're going to have a championship and points, the philosophy is correct. If we get rid of the World Championship completely and we go back to how Formula One was prior to 1950, and each race is just a race in its own right, then obviously you want the best 2 guys you can get in the car at any given moment. But if you're going to do it for points, it's completely logical that each team, if they've got a Max or a Lewis or a Charles or a George or perhaps even a Lando, then you don't need to compromise that with somebody super quick in the other car. Either taking points or distracting the driver. As I said, if you look at Lando in Saudi Arabia, when on the end of his Q1 lap, he just turned into the guardrail, apex guardrail, and that was it. It started from the back of the grid, hit the guardrail. I don't believe that would have happened had his teammate been Daniel Ricciardo. I think that happened because he knew that by the end of that lap, he wasn't up anywhere on the very, very quick young Australian. And because of that, he lost concentration slightly. Maybe he was looking at the dash. Maybe he was thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to be quicker? What am I going to... Bang, he hit the wall. I asked him about it. He actually said, oh, no, the car, what happened was he turned the wheel and the car actually turned in sharper than he thought it would. And I thought, yeah, right. That's really like you, Lando, to make a mistake like that. No, for sure, mentally there was something going on. And, you know, the whole Oscar Piastri thing is there. Quick driver, no doubt. Much quicker than Daniel Ricciardo right now. But now he's in the peripheral vision of Oscar Piastri, of Lando Norris, whereas Daniel was never in Lando's peripheral. He was always behind. So that's where I think it's very important. Thank you for that question, Luke Noonan. Ryan E. Would love to see how fast Fernando would be in the Red Bull. Well, my answer to that would probably be an annoying answer for you. Sorry, I think we've lost the exposure again. Here we go. My answer to that is, well, look at Max Verstappen. That's how quick Fernando Alonso would be. Maybe a shade slower. He'd be quicker than Sergio, for sure, obviously. And I think, okay, are there moments so far this year where Fernando would have done a better job than Max Verstappen in that car? I don't think there are, to be honest. I think Max has got 100% out of that car on all three occasions. But I think Fernando would be spectacular in the Red Bull. There's no doubt about it. But I think that would show up in races, possibly halfway through. Fernando, you're on a different strategy. Don't pass Max. Okay. I think it would be more of that than it would be, wow, Fernando's just taken the pole away from Max Verstappen. Furious Wolf 777 Voodoo. There's a name for you. Says, best team wins. Yeah, philosophical point. And I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, I would like to take that further and say, I'm always happy that the fastest car and the fastest driver is on the pole. And I'm always happy if the fastest driver and the fastest car wins the race, even if there are no overtaking at all. Because that's what racing is all about. And I love to see perfection as much as I love to see action. If you can call overtaking action, which I guess you can. So yeah, Formula One's a very difficult sport in that sense, because when a car is quick and it's enabling a driver to have an advantage over other drivers, it's very difficult for the general public to see why that is the case and how good a job the driver in the inferior car is doing in order to be where he is. And that's part of the message that the media should be giving to the public. And I don't think the media are given very much access to what's going on, so they don't do a very good job by definition of explaining how and why one car is slower than another, any more than the teams really know why one car is slower than another. As he fades into darkness again, it never used to do this. I'm going to have to set the exposure manually, which I'll work out how to do next time. Sorry about all that. Turbo GSR says, how close was engine power in 2021? I've read a lot of different things from it. It was close between Merc and Honda. To Honda had more because of the high rate drag of the Red Bull. I've always tended to think that the Merc was actually slightly quicker than the Honda in 21. But I don't think there was much in it. I think now the general feeling is that Renault have got the slowest engine and Ferrari are number 3, and it's pretty close between Honda and Mercedes. There are some people out there saying, oh no, Honda are definitely better than Mercedes now. But, Aston Martin are not slow. Okay, they are quite slow in a straight line, admittedly, but that's because they have quite a lot of downforce, not because the engine's slow. And we saw how quick the factory Mercedes were in Melbourne on a circuit which isn't all about, you know, running small wing, a small amount of downforce. They were really quick in a straight line. So I would think the Mercedes engine is not far away or about on a par with the Honda right now. Jesse Lund. Everything's good to go. Thank you, Jesse. Sebastian Bach. Checo on the chopping block for Danny. Talented and marketable. What is Danny's next Formula One move? Well, hopefully it's to stay where he is, mate, because he made the mistake of leaving Red Bull in the first place, which he should never have done. Everybody of note in the Red Bull team said to Daniel, don't do this, Daniel. It's the best chance you're ever going to have to win more Grand Prix and to be in the running to win a World Championship, as Webber was against Vettel at Red Bull. And don't go to Renault. Don't do this for the money. Don't do it. And we'll still look after you. We love you, even though Max, of course, is our chosen boy. But he just wouldn't listen. And he went off and he made his money and he made a massive mistake. You don't ever leave the best team in Formula One with the best car. Ever, really. It takes you so long to get into it in the first place. Why would you just walk away? But he did. But anyway, he's now back, tail between his legs, you could say, third driver. You know, will Red Bull get increasingly annoyed with Sergio Perez and replace him with Daniel? Why not? You know, you could say, oh, what about the Constructors' Championship, the points and all the rest of it? Well, I think Daniel will continue to score points, and I think he will be, that happy smile will be on his face every time he gets in and out of the car, probably in the car as well. And as I said at the start of this live stream, I think he will know how fortunate he is to be back in the second best car in Formula One and how nice that car is to drive in all conditions. And there will be moments, events, races when he will win races for sure. So all those Daniel Ricciardo fans out there, I would say it's not beyond the realm of possibility that he will be back in that car. I don't think he's got any hope anywhere else, to be honest, but you know, that could happen. And it's astonishing that Perez doesn't realise that. You'd think he'd be just Mr. Nice Guy all the time, wouldn't you? Excuse me, Christian, I think you're paying me a bit too much. Could you give me a 20% reduction? Give me a few more bonuses maybe if I win a Grand Prix, but you guys have been so good to me that I really want to show my appreciation by enabling everybody else to have a bigger bonus at the end of the year. Why doesn't he do that? Yeah, right. Rao, R-A-U-O. Sorry if I've mispronounced that, Rao. Do you think, sounds a bit like Raul Bozel, but without the L. Do you think Nigel Mansell and Fernando Alonso's teammates would be explosive, box office? It will be explosive, that's for sure. Absolutely explosive. You'd never put those two guys together in a million years. Box office? Yeah, absolutely. If you filmed everything, if you filmed what went on in the motorhomes once they shut the door, yeah, it'd be absolutely explosive. I've always said, pictures of real pictures of drivers who are annoyed and throwing helmets are much better than pictures of drivers kissing one another or kissing the other team members and hugging because they just won a race. We want to see the helmet throwing and why they're throwing the helmet and what it's all about. Yeah, I mean, all those great things Nigel did. Great, I better not use that word. All those things Nigel did, you know, flooring Gerhard Berger and fighting with Ayrton Senna and punch up with Ferrari, Alan Prost people, all that stuff. Imagine if all that had been on social media. So yeah, Nigel was absolutely unafraid to say whatever needed to be said at any given moment. And good luck to him. A real race driver, I think. Brett Lower. Peter, have you ever watched a rocket-powered Mohawk Formula One video? I haven't, no. So there's always a first, I think, mate. Ali Al-Ramadan. Hi. Could you explain Carlos's driving style and how it's different to Leclerc's? When you say Carlos, do you mean Carlos Sainz or Carlos Reutemann? No, I think you mean Carlos Sainz. Well, Carlos Sainz is definitely wider corner entry, so he brakes more in a straight line and runs deeper into the corner before he gives it steering input. So he's got a longer corner, but it's quite a safe thing to do because he wants to know that he can see where he's going before he's got the power on, to put it in very elementary terms. Whereas Max, as we know, brakes earlier, but he's not just braking earlier doing nothing. He's starting to peel the car into an earlier turn in, and he's effectively therefore already shortening the corner. He's using less road. If you put white paint in a trail behind Max's car for the lap, and the same for Carlos Sainz. Sorry, we're talking about Charles Leclerc. Well, the same thing applies for Charles Leclerc. Sorry about that. Charles Leclerc, exactly the same thing can be said. And then you measured the length of those white tapes, Charles Leclerc against Carlos Sainz. Then Charles would be shorter. He'd be covering less road. So that's part of it. But also in doing that early turn in, he's also maximizing the performance of the tire. So he's getting a spring loading through the sidewall that Sainz isn't getting, and that may be something that he can use as he's starting to turn in against the release of the brake pedal pressure. And that's something that all the great drivers all do. They play with not thinking about it, but innately they feel what's going on with the loaded left front, and that is around the point at which they're driving the car. Whereas Carlos Sainz is driving the car basically on the left rear. He's waiting for the moment when he knows he can get on the power, and then to get on the power as quickly and obviously as smoothly as possible. And so that's the big difference. It's all into the corner. From apex to exit, it's not a lot of difference. And some drivers like Sergio Perez particularly are very, very good from apex to exit in the way they load the car up, and they do it, and they're very patient in the way they do it. Sorry, we got quite a large underexposed section now. It's coming back now. So that's basically it. But then on top of that, in order to do all that stuff that Charles does compared with Sainz, he has to be very, very sensitive with all his inputs. The initial steering input, the initial pedal input, throttle and brake, compared with Carlos, he doesn't have to worry too much about that. All he's interested in is just braking super late as he can possibly brake without running out of road, crashing. And that's what the approach to the corner is all about with Carlos. So it's just slamming on the brakes and then stopping the car and then getting the car in and on the power. And if he's ever in a situation where he's got to brake with load on the car, and it's a slight curve, for example, before a tight left-hander or right-hander, then that's where he's in trouble, because he has to try to create a straight line bit before he can get the car turning. Whereas Max is able to brake with the car carrying load in a much more subtle way than Carlos. Max and Charles. I keep saying Max. It's a Freudian slip, isn't it? Because there's Max doing all these things incredibly well. But I should say Lewis does all of those things exactly the same way as Max and Charles. And Charles in my view, is right there. I think Charles, a moment, and I think it's showing, I think Charles has gone through a lot of stuff in his personal life and in the way he's had to live at Ferrari and work at Ferrari and the politics at Ferrari and everything that happens at Ferrari. And that inevitably eats away at the simplicity at which you need to have in your brain in order to drive well and do the job, because he's thinking of a lot of other stuff and he's got a lot of other things going on. So I don't think at the moment anyone would say Charles Leclerc is ready to do exactly the same job as Max Verstappen, because Max has got a much cleaner plate on which to eat his food. Whereas Charles got all sorts of stuff going on, and it's quite difficult for him to see all the things he needs in order to be really good. The big thing is how well Lewis is still driving, given all the stuff that's around him. Part of that comes under the heading of being a 7 times world champion and all the pressures that come with that and the publicity and all the rest of it. But part of it is also not having a race-winning car for the first time in his life, really, and having to live with that and having a super quick teammate in the other car and having to swallow what happened in Abu Dhabi in 2021. There's a lot of stuff. And yet there he is, weekend in, weekend out, is still driving absolutely just as Lewis Hamilton has always driven. And to me, that's one of the great achievements of the last 18 months, is how well Lewis Hamilton has driven, given all that stuff. Amazing. So I hope that kind of explains. Apologies for confusing Max with Charles, but as I say, it's kind of Freudian anyway. Brazil 16, I'll never forget that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and let's hear it for Brazil, because great circuit, Interlagos, fabulous circuit. And so much can happen there for the weather, the undulation, the nature of the corners, the run onto the straight, up the hill, and of course the country and the people and the whole thing that goes right back to Emerson Fittipaldi. I'll never forget the opening line. Speaking of my early days, David Phipps was the journalist I was ghostwriting for, and he, I'm pretty sure it was 72 Brazilian Grand Prix at Brasilia that Emerson was leading until sort of 2 laps from the end. And his opening line of this report was, "It was as if Pele had missed an open goal." I just thought it summed it up pretty well. I think, if I'm correct, I think that was Carlos Reutemann. I think Carlos Reutemann won that race. I think, speaking of Brazil. Javier Mares, hope I pronounced that correctly, Javier. I'm getting increasingly annoyed with this exposure thing, and I can only keep apologising for it. Mind you, everybody there is probably thinking, oh, thank goodness it's underexposed. We don't have to look at Peter anymore. So I shouldn't be apologising, really. But we'll get it right. Says, hi Peter, Stampede251 here. Oh, hello Stampede251. Yeah, I know you from Twitch. Thank you for your answer about Formula One technique the other day. Despite lack of G feel, I've already gained consistently in performance from paying attention to these aspects. Oh, well, that's good to hear. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's amazing if you think about the technology that Karl Kempf pioneered in 1974. Telemetry on the car based on the friction circle or the traction ellipse, which was well known by then, that Mark Donoghue had basically brought to the attention of all motor racing fans with the work he did with General Motors. It's amazing today, you can buy a road car and it's got a friction circle in it, and you can actually start playing around with, you know, early turn in and maximizing the performance of the tires. So good to hear, Javier. Thank you. I don't know. Another question. Why has Lewis so many haters? Well, I don't think he has, and anybody that hates Lewis needs to get a life. Daniel Gould. Will Red Bull have reliability issues like Ferrari and let Mercedes catch up? Well, I don't think Red Bull will ever try and do anything to let anybody catch up. But having said that, I do think that if Red Bull... I think the opposite, actually. I think if Red Bull win the next 3 or 4 races... and they've got a pretty secure hold on the 23 World Championship, and let's face it, they probably will do exactly that. I think they'll do what they did last year and actually just go for reliability for the rest of the year. They'll put a bit of weight on the car, on bits that may be a little bit dodgy, and you'll see the car actually... Why is this ridiculous exposure drama? There we go. I think you'll see them do that, and maybe therefore they'll get a bit slower relative to Mercedes and Ferrari or Aston Martin as the season progresses, purely because they basically won the championship in their own minds, and they're just going for reliability and they're starting to work on 2024. So I think that's more likely to happen. I don't think they will run into major reliability problems. But the famous last words, touch wood, you know, who knows? That's not something that you can never guarantee. But at the moment, reliability at Ferrari, not great. And Mercedes, not bad. Red Bull, not bad, give or take the odd drama that they had, obviously, in qualifying in Saudi Arabia. Darshan Pithadaya says, from where did you buy your shirt? It's made by Globe, Globe, Australian skateboard company. They do this sort of stuff. Peter Hill, good friend of mine, who also a pretty good racing driver, big fan of Rob Wilson as well. And he's got this great company, Globe, which is global, skateboards mainly, but a lot of other stuff. They do electric skateboards as well, and lots of, dare I say, cool clothing. I don't think I'm allowed to at my age, am I? But anyway, clothing, nice clothing. But thank you, Darshan, for that. DMA Harry, Peter, question 2. You were part of US GP team that never took off. What happened? Aren't we desperate for another US team? Well, it's a long story, but in a nutshell, I think on our side of the fence, we had everything, you know, we had all our ducks in a row. And initially, Max and Bernie said, wow, this is a great thing. Formula One needs an American team. Congratulations, brilliant. And then about 6 weeks later, they said, oh, we've rethought it all. And what we're going to do is create a new World Championship around teams like yours called Budget Cap World Championship. And it'll be part of the same race, but you're going to have bigger wings, more revs, but you can only spend 30 million doing the car. And you've got to buy Cosworth engines from me, Bernie. As it now turns out, we knew that's the deal he'd done. So that wasn't in any way what we wanted to do. We wanted to just get onto the grid, walk, canter, gallop, and hopefully do well. Instead of which they then, having had 2 slots on the grid, 3 I think, open for the previous 5 years, and we just wanted to fill one of those, they then said, we're throwing it open to tender, with new budget cap 30 million Formula One team. And of course, the whole world suddenly decided they wanted to do a Formula One team. Like 9 people came forward and said, yeah, we can do a Formula One team. So everything we wanted to do in terms of planning the team in 2009, we couldn't do because we couldn't then get signed into the Concord Agreement until they'd decided which were these teams that would go through into this budget cap thing. And I kept saying, we don't want this budget cap thing. I just want to do a normal Formula One team. Thank you very much. And eventually they got us in, we were one of the 4 teams, I think it was, or 3 teams. And then we said, well, it's now September, October. We're going to do the factory, we're going to do the car, we're going to test the car, we're going to crash test the car, we're going to race, see you in 2 years' time. And Max said, well, if you don't have the car fully crash tested, ready to go in 4 months, you're out. We've got too many other people wanting to do a team. It's a complete nut and nonsense, Gene Haas had 2 years, I think, to prepare his team. Correctly so. And even then he was running a Dallara, and we had 4 months. It was absolutely ridiculous. So that's the end of what I'm going to say now, apart from if anybody in the world, and I think you viewers would all subscribe to this, drew up a list of all the things that could go wrong if you wanted to do your own new Formula One team, you could come up with about 20 things that wouldn't work, like not enough money, bad car, terrible drivers, whatever, no engine deal, all those things. When I drew up that list, I did a similar list. And the things that I never, ever predicted are all the things that happened. I never imagined that Bernie and Max would come up with this ridiculous budget cap world championship thing and would force us to run Cosworth engines. In our case, expensive Cosworth engines, because we'd already got a free engine deal with 2 manufacturers, both of whom had offered free engines, Ferrari and Toyota. And I spoke personally to Luca Montezemolo at Ferrari about that, and personally to Toyota about that. Both of them were going to be free because they loved the idea of an American team. And we were forced to run this. And Bernie, when he told us about it, he said, oh, by the way, you've got to run Cosworth engines, 7 million needed by next week deposit. And if you haven't paid that, you'll be out. And it was just, the whole thing was, and it was all, I don't know, I know why it happened, and it was driven by Max, but it was partly because Bernie obviously hadn't signed the Concord Agreement with all the top teams at that point, and he was using this budget cap thing as a threat to them, saying, well, if you don't want to sign, I'm going to do a completely new world championship around all these new teams. That's basically what it was all about. And we were just pawns, political pawns, and it meant in the end, of course, that we never had a chance to get anything sorted. Great shame, because I still think the technology is there in North America on that East Coast stretch from Charlotte down to, I don't know, Daytona, to do a Formula One car. Obviously, you base the thing in Europe, but I still think it's there. I think probably not anymore because we got all those races in America, but I think there's still a huge opportunity for corporate America to get behind a Formula One team, an American Formula One team, and obviously American drivers, plenty of enough talented American drivers out there to be in an American F1 team. And that was always going to be our plan. And I'd already, talked to people like Newgarden and Rossi and all those guys, Ray Hull, and all of them could have done a half reasonable job. The driver that actually, I regret more than anything else not happening with that team was Sebastian Loeb, who rang to say, well, his guy rang to say, he'd love to be given an opportunity to test and see if he was any good. And I immediately thought, wow, wouldn't that be brilliant? I've got so much respect for Sebastian Loeb in everything he's ever done, and for him as a human being as well. And I remember at the time, I think the FIA had said to him that they weren't going to give him a license or something to do Formula One, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous. And of course we never got to do that. But that was, I've got a million regrets about that team not happening. But one of the major ones is a Sebastian Loebling. Would love to have done that with Sebastian. Another one was Kyle Busch. He was really keen to do it as well. At a point when he'd done what he wanted to do in a NASCAR, he knew that he was going to need to do a lot of testing and get into it. And if we'd had that year of testing, which we should have had, then we would have run Kyle Busch as well. Great shame. But thank you for the question, DMA Harry. Turbo GSL. No real Formula One fan can hate Hamilton. This coming from a Verstappen and Hamilton fan. Well, good to know, Turbo GSR. There's nothing wrong with being a Max fan, but you don't hate other drivers just because you're a fan of Max Verstappen, vice versa. Well, it's hatred business. I mean, I was a Jim Clark fan, but it didn't mean I hated Graham Hill or John Surtees or Lorenzo Bandini or Dan Gurney. I mean, what was that all about? I mean, this hatred thing is, where does it come from? I just find it, appalling. The mantra that I was taught once was and is, see nothing as bad, never look down on anything or anyone, and always respect others at all times. And wouldn't it be great if everybody, I don't live by that mantra, I mean, I've got a million failings, but wouldn't it be lovely if we all tried to all the time? I think Formula One would be a better place. I don't think hatred is a good thing at all. Iran F1. Here's a serious question from Iran F1. Hello, Peter. Should Vijay Mallya and Fisichella return to Formula One? Well, for those that don't remember that, these were the guys that were really quick from that team that was started by Eddie Jordan. Forget all this business of Fernando Alonso finishing third in the Aston Martin. This was Fisichella almost winning the Belgian Grand Prix in a Force India. Same people, basically. Andy Green car. And Vijay Mallya doing the same job as, shall we say it, doing the same job as Lawrence Stroll, but on an absolute shoestring. And obviously there were other issues going on with Vijay's life as well. But when you think of what those guys achieved with the money they didn't have, amazing. No surprise, actually. Now they got a bit of money in there and they got more people and all this and all that. They are going very well because the basic organic core of that team has always been very good. A bit like Tolman, which became Benetton, which became Renault, which eventually became Alpine. Good team. It's not just the French running that team from the Renault engine perspective. It's still the hardcore ethos of what made Tolman so good. And that's the same with Force India. Yeah, good question. Excellent. Iceman, back again. Was it a good idea for McLaren to have two very young drivers? Should they have gone for experience to complement Norris? Well, I don't know about experience. I think they should have gone for somebody a bit more middle of the road to complement Norris. I think any driver that doesn't oblige Lando to have to constantly look in his mirrors sideways like this would be fine. What they don't need is a driver who does distract Lando, because Lando's very, very good. He's not Lewis yet, but he's George for sure, and he's slightly, I think he's slightly softer with his input than George. Inputs and corners about the same length, a little bit wide on entry, but a very, very good racing character. He's just very good. I mean, he reminds me a lot of a cross between Nigel and Max, actually, in the way he thinks, Lando. And if you've got Lando, you just put in the guy that will do the job to get the best from Lando. That's what I would do if I was running McLaren. I wouldn't put in the guy that is the best possible young driver of the future, because it might annoy Lando to the point where he leaves the team and goes and does something else. I mean, here's the thing. I suggested this in Australia and somebody went, well, it's not impossible. And the person that responded that works for Ferrari, right? A serious player at Ferrari. And I won't drop him in it, but I said, what do you think will happen with Lando? And then we talk about how good Lando was. I said, do you think he's got a chance at Ferrari? And he said, well, yeah, probably has. And then I said, he could go to Alpine, couldn't he? Do the swap deal with Piastri. And he said, yeah, that could definitely happen. That'd be funny, wouldn't it? Because Alpine are not a bad team. I mean, I don't in any way decry, if you had an open choice and you said, right, you're Oscar Piastri, new guy in Formula One. You got a firm offer from McLaren, firm offer from Alpine. Which team do you want to drive for? I think most of us would probably say McLaren, wouldn't they? Given the history of McLaren and, you know, Zach Brown and the technology centre and the coolness of McLaren. I don't think you can in any way decry that choice. The only point I've ever made about Oscar Piastri is the way he made that choice. And at the moment he made that choice, he actually had a race drive with Alpine. That's what I've always banged on about as being very poor, whatever, very poor ethics. And so, but having, you know, made the choice, he's obviously going to be very good at McLaren because he's very, very quick. He's very good. Short corners. You know, he looks like a young Max to me, Oscar Piastri. He's really, really quick. And that's, you know, that's not good news for Lando Norris, for sure. Here we go, says Poncho 009. Probably means it's working. Here's a good question. Miran Dilberovic. Hope I pronounced that correctly, Miran. Can you please talk what Rob thinks of K-Mag? Well, yeah, I can tell you exactly what Rob thinks of K-Mag. He thinks he's really good because he did a K-Mag evaluation before he went to McLaren. And I think it was on behalf of McLaren. It was before he raced at McLaren. And I'm trying to think who the other couple of drivers were. I better not drop them in it because, anyway, he said at the end of it, he said the guy with the softest inputs and the guy with the shortest corners and the guy, therefore, with the most potential to become very, very good is Magnussen. And I think on that strength at the time, I think that's why they signed him. Rob said, you know, he really is potentially very, very good. And I remember talking to Franz Tost that year, and this was before he raced at McLaren, about Toro Rosso and drivers. And he said, because I think at the time, I think I was saying something like, you know, what do you think of Felix Rosenqvist, who I still think he's very good. I was mentioning him. And Tost said spontaneously, he said, oh no, the best young guy out there is Magnussen for sure. I thought that was quite impressive coming from Tost. I remember actually WhatsApping, was it WhatsApp then or text, whatever, Kevin to tell him that Tost had said that. And he was quite touched. Anyway, he then got the McLaren driver and he was brilliant, wasn't he, out of the box. And then he got, you know, maybe he lost a little bit of, maybe he got a little bit complacent. I don't know. I think that's a little bit in his character. Certainly he and Ron kind of fell out, didn't they? And now he's back again, kind of, although Nico looks really good. And I mean, the only thing Rob, of course, wouldn't have evaluated would be Kevin's mental approach to racing. Everything he's talking about was driving the car physically. And you know, Kevin's approach mentally is not Fernando's approach or Max's approach or even Charles Leclerc's approach. It's K-Mag's approach. And I think that's what it is. But certainly in terms of his raw talent, Rob really rates him, or rated him. I think he probably still would. If he did a couple of days with him, he'd probably still say the same things. Because those talents don't go away at all. Shanky has got Vijay Mallya and then a big fire next to it. I don't know what that means. Probably means yes, or maybe J.R. Rosberg. I don't think is my friend Nico or Kayo. Happy Easter, Mr. Windsor. Happy Easter to you too. Very much so. Just rang my mum, who's 101, to wish her happy Easter. And she just had lunch and she was very pleased that she'd been able to walk from the restaurant to back to her room and still active, and was looking forward to watching a bit of sport on TV in the afternoon. So my mum, 101, brilliant, happy Easter. Javier Mares again. How do you imagine the experience of watching Formula One could be in the future so that it'll be more engaging, richer, more interesting? Well, as I said, kind of touched on earlier, to me, the way to bring Formula One really to life is the next time the Concord Agreement comes up to be signed, the owners of the commercial rights, probably Liberty still, need to say to the teams, this ain't happening unless you agree to the following. Every race, at least one team must allow its debrief to be filmed live. Every race, one team must provide 2 cars which we will fit with GoPro cameras and mics, and they must be cars in which your Formula One drivers are riding, and we want to hear the conversation and what they're talking about on the way home in the car. And we want to be able to film, all the teams will agree that we film all the drivers' briefings live. And we must have access to the top 3 drivers in the World Championship at the end of the year to do a global world tour in key countries for Formula One, which involve chat shows, charity events, karting charity events, hugely promoted by Liberty or the commercial rights holder. As I say, in countries really important to Formula One, to keep the Formula One fire burning over the winter. And none of this holiday stuff in Jamaica. Those top 3 in the World Championship. The downside, guys, if you're top 3 in the World Championship, you will be doing this world tour, and it'll take at least 5 weeks. That's what I would say. But of course, none of that will happen because the teams will say, no, we're not doing it, forget it. And, but that's how I would improve television. I would take what I imagine to be the Netflix show to the next level, where we actually have these live debriefs and you're actually getting drivers shouting and screaming, saying, Perez, good example, the Perez stuff on qualifying. It would have been really cool to have seen the Red Bull debrief after Saturday, would it not, live? How many viewers would that have got on TV? The entire Mexican nation for a start. So that's a good question, thank you. Prince May, on equal machinery, who do you think is most likely to win the World Drivers' Championship among current drivers? Equal machinery, I mean, what? It's never equal. My answer is always so boring. How are you going to ensure it's all equal machinery? It's very easy to say that, but no. I think Lewis is a guy who's got an ability to handle every aspect of motorsport in a really all-embracing way. And I think what we've seen in the last 18 months is how Lewis drives when he's got a super quick teammate and he hasn't got a very good car, and he still drives beautifully. And there are not many world champions, let alone multi-world champions, about which you can say that. And I don't know. I would say Lewis, probably. Fernando, Max. I would say probably Max, maybe Fernando in that order. I don't know. I'd say Lewis probably has a slight edge. But yeah, interesting question. I think it's very difficult. Obviously, the real answer is, well, it's hypothetical, and how can we do that? That's the English politician's answer. But I think it, begs the question of, if there was no World Championship, how would it be? And that's an interesting one, isn't it? Sterling Moss, never won the World Championship. One of the greatest racing drivers of all time, no doubt at all. Daniel Gould, good on Checo. He's a racing driver. He wants to win too. Yeah, but that's a different thing, isn't it? Wanting to win. I mean, if the big storm at Red Bull was about Checo not letting Max past in the last 3 laps of a race in which Max could have won the World Championship, and by not doing so, it enabled Checo to still be in the World Championship, 4 races to go at the end of the year, whatever. I would agree with everything you've just said, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about a guy that went off 5 times on Saturday when he couldn't get any tyre temperature. So it's not like, oh yeah, there's something wrong with my car, therefore I'm a racer. That's not the logical sequence of events there. This is a different thing. This is, I've got something I need to be doing with my brake pedal modulation that I'm not doing, that Max is. And I need to keep quiet about this because I haven't done a very good job. It's more that. And so I don't think you can say, oh wow, he's a racer, just because he's saying, I want the same car as Max, if you see my point. Poncho 009. So you think Hulk would just kept quiet? Yeah, I do. I think Hulkenberg would. Well, kept quiet about what? I think, as I said, if you're making mistakes and the other guy's beating you, the logical thing is to keep quiet. Why would you not want to keep quiet? I think after Saudi Arabia, before Melbourne, I don't think Hulkenberg, in the situation Perez is in, would have said, oh, all bets are off now. I've got just as much chance to win the World Championship as Max Verstappen. I don't think Nico would do that. I don't think Daniel would have said that. I don't think many people would have said that, actually, to be honest. It was a rather foolhardy thing for Perez to say. Be more likely, I mean, what he should have said was, so pleased to have won the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I love this car, brilliant team. We've got a few races ahead, but I just can't wait to drive this car at Monaco, just to get Monaco in Max's head again. That's what I would have done if I was managing Perez. I would have done that just to, not to wind up Max, but just to get Max thinking about, yeah, Perez is not slow around Monaco, that is for sure. You know, just little things like that. Be a bit more subtle about it. Don't just say, oh, you know, I deserve to win the World Championship. It's a bit over the top, isn't it? Checo and his fans are overreaching, says Agpon5, and I think that's right. Mothusi Masidi says, when are you doing a show with Scarborough? Well, yeah, bring it on. Let's get massive viewing figures for this live stream, so I can go to Scarbs and say, Scarbs, you know, popular demand, mate. You've got to have you there. But yeah, no, we'll do some stuff. We've actually got quite a lot planned in the development of, dare I say it, peterwindsor.com / Peter Windsor social media platforms coming up. And one of them is to try and do some live events and live streams with special guests as well. So more of that coming. So looks like YouTube had just put out a thing giving the YouTube live stream link, which is quite good. Coney, Washington now. Troy Slab, Sergio has a fiery attitude. This might hurt him in the long term. Yeah, I mean, but the ironic thing is that he hasn't actually displayed this fiery attitude very much, has he? He's actually been, I mean, that's why Red Bull signed him, because he's actually been pretty smooth and composed, I think, in the way he's gone about his career. There have been the odd moments, obviously, but, you know, I don't think any of us thought, maybe if you did, put your hand up, but I don't think many of us thought 2 years ago, wow, Red Bull have signed this really fiery Mexican. There are going to be major problems with his personality. I certainly thought, yeah, Perez is on the sort of, in the autumn of his career, he's going to be incredibly grateful to be in this car on this team. He's going to be very polished. He's going to do a good job. He'll stay quiet, and he'll for sure win some Grand Prix because he's good enough to do so when Max has some problems. That's what I thought. And to some extent, that was all going well. Maybe it's all because of this thing in Brazil last year. But again, you know, if I was Perez as manager and Perez really was feeling that, you know, that he was hard done by in Brazil by Max when Max didn't let him repass, I would be saying to Checo, save it. Just be Mr. Nice Guy. There'll be a moment when you can do this back. Just save it. That's what I'd be saying. Why would you want to upset the Jonathan Wheatleys and the Christian Horners and all the good guys there at Red Bull by doing all this? It just, there's no upside to it at all. If you've got those guys against you starting to say, well, you know, we don't need this hassle, then that's a slippery slope out of the team, I think. Sebastian Bach says, Formula One stewards seem to be in a shambles. What changes need to be made? Well, they need to pay Herbie Blash enough money to just do Formula One exclusively and be at every race and be the steward, I think, or be the race director, let's put it that way, and just get things done. But yeah, you're right. And just, you know, all these decisions they take for the wrong reason at the wrong time. It's a complete and utter minefield politically, that. The only thing I would say is that I thought the decision to penalise Carlos Sainz was absolutely ridiculous and was only handed out at that time because of what had happened in Saudi Arabia when there was P3 was under dispute and everybody was saying we've got to get the results immediately, and so they went the other way, far too much the other way, and just handed this ridiculous 5-second penalty to Carlos for an incident that actually was in a race that never happened. I mean, whichever way you cut it, and the other side to cut it is by giving him a 5-second penalty, they're effectively disqualifying him because it was a safety car finish. It was completely and utterly absurd. And I think that I feel more pain about that than I have for anything in Formula One for a long time. I think it's completely and utterly unfair. Actually, since Abu Dhabi 21, I think it's the biggest rip-off since Abu Dhabi 21. That one. So Perez, to me, was, he's talking about things like, was my braking system as good as Max's? And you got something like the Carlos Sainz incident. That's a much more significant thing than Checo Perez and where he's at Red Bull. Prince May says, after Checo, who do you think Red Bull should sign next? Well, Daniel. Why not Daniel? He's old enough to be Max's wingman nicely. It's the logical choice. Somebody like that. Nico Hülkenberg, great idea. Why not Nico? He would do a very good job. I think Carlos Sainz would do quite a good job there, actually. If he went there, knowing that he was never going to be able to beat Max Verstappen, and he went there to be just the right guy in the team, I think that would be good. Daniel Gould says, Daniel probably isn't sure what he wants, to be honest, right now. Well, probably not, because it's been a weird few years for him, isn't it? Walking away from a great car and a great team into a mediocre car and a pretty good team, into a mediocre car and a pretty good team and a quicker young driver who's much less experienced than he is, and then coming back to Red Bull to be third driver. It's obviously a weird time for Daniel Ricciardo, but then again, he's got a lot of money in the bank now, so he shouldn't be too upset about it. Richard Putman says, love the shirt. Well, Globe make this shirt, but thank you very much. Ponchov 009, it's very odd that now we are getting surprised by a driver that wants to win and says it. If you're referring to Sergio Perez, as I said, my comment there is it's one thing to say, I'm not going to let the teammate pass, or I'm going to race him. I'm not going to listen to team orders, and I'm a racer. It's quite another to say, I'm not very good under braking, and they need to develop a better car for me, and I'm a racer. To me, the two are not the same at all. And what Perez should be doing is very rapidly booking 10 days with Rob Wilson to make sure he's got no issues at all under braking. Trying to get this exposure back. It's just like, every time it comes, every time I move my head slightly, it disappears. So annoying. Anyway, you'll be rid of me in about half an hour, so you'll be pleased to know that. Marcus Strowman, hey, maybe late. Peter, isn't 2008 comparable to Abu Dhabi? People seem to be able to justify Abu Dhabi since Bernie's words. Yeah, lots have happened, but I think what happened in 2021 in Abu Dhabi was like the vortex, the pinnacle of everything that could possibly go wrong in Formula One, the build-up of a lot of different factions of the sport and the entertainment that it had become, and COVID and everything else. It was just like some massive thing that exploded in Abu Dhabi 21. And after that, things will never be the same. And I think that is the case. Rao, why did Toyota fail with such a large budget? Well, they failed to win a race. They got some good results, didn't they? I don't think their driver choice was brilliant. I had no issues with Jarno Trulli, but I'm not sure paying Ralf Schumacher as much as they did, which was over 20 mil, to lead Toyota was ever going to be a great thing, because his hunger went, and he wasn't the driver he was at Williams. So I think if they'd had Max Verstappen or Lewis or somebody, I think they certainly would have won Grand Prix. So that's the first thing that needs to be said. I don't think their driver choice was great. Obviously, there was a sort of doctrine of the way Toyota had gone rallying with Ove Anderson, and there was a continuum into the Formula One program in Cologne. A lot of people have said, well, Cologne, how can you run a Formula One team out of Cologne? Well, guess what? McLaren have been using that Cologne wind tunnel, still using it right now as we speak. They're commissioning their new tunnel in Woking, but still using it. And they won Grand Prix with that tunnel. So not much wrong with the wind tunnel in Cologne, that's for sure. And I don't think much wrong in terms of logistics either. So it's a DHL hub, I think, Cologne, very near anyway. So I don't criticize any of that. I think mainly it was drivers. I think they had a pretty good car, generally speaking. And I think John Howard did a good job as team principal. I always thought he was a very logical, respectable person, Formula One person. I don't think Bernie Ecclestone liked him at all or respected him, and probably that didn't work in Toyota's favour. But then full marks to them for not giving in to Bernie, for having a guy in there who was a real person as distinct from a Bernie clone or a Bernie acolyte, more likely, I think was a good thing. And it was appropriate for Toyota, who at that stage were the world's biggest car company, probably still are, I don't know. But they're up there, to have somebody like John Howard, because he was a good man. He is a good man. And so I think that probably in the private club of Formula One, that didn't help either. But I would say mainly driver choice, actually, if I think about it with the benefit of hindsight. I would have had Jarno, but I would have moved heaven and earth to have got a Fernando or I don't know, anybody super quick at that point. Anyway, Rachel Colks, I assume that when they signed Checo, they said, help Max get his first championship. Then you can both go for it, not expecting Checo's performance in the beginning of the year. I don't think you're right to assume that, Rachel. I think they would have said always, come join the team. Max will have priority all the time. But if you are in a position to win, and it's not affecting Max's race, to win a race or the championship, we will be 100% behind you. But if Max is in the running for either the win or the championship, you will always race for the team, and you will follow instructions. And sometimes we may say to you, Checo, yep, you're free to race Max, because that may be what we think is appropriate at the time. We're not going to be specific about anything in advance, but you will respond to team orders in every situation. I'm almost certain that's what they would have said. And I don't think anything would have changed after Saudi Arabia, because they would have thought, wow, Max Verstappen, with that issue he had in qualifying, is still finished second. Unbelievable drive. Great drive by Max. Brilliant to have Checo take over the reins with Max in trouble. Now let's see we'll move on, please. I don't think they would have thought, now Checo's going to be fighting for the championship. It was the same thing happened at Monaco last year. When he won Monaco, it was all like, can Checo take the championship to Max? And it's because everything's sort of short-term news, social media, instant soundbite stuff. And it's nobody taking the medium or long-term view, which is great for the team. And you've got to, the guy that you employ for the other car has to be able to take up the slack if Max Verstappen has a problem, which is exactly what Checo did. He did the job perfectly. But it doesn't mean to say anything more than that. He took up the slack when Max had a problem. And it's not a question of, if Max is slow and Checo's quick, that Checo has to slow down and let Max win the race or pass him. They will take everything on its own merit, given every situation. And if some race comes up where Max has a race like Charles Leclerc's and can't get the car to work at all and qualifies badly, and Checo's on the front row and is leading, and Max eventually gets up to P2 with 20 seconds behind Checo and there are 3 laps to go, I can't imagine any way in the world Red Bull will tell Checo to slow down and give the win to Max. I don't think they would do that. But what they wouldn't want is Checo winding up the media to say, I'm getting, inferior equipment. They're not looking after me the way they look after Max. I deserve this. I deserve that. That's what they didn't sign Checo Perez to do. And to me, it's all pretty simple, clear stuff. But a lot of people, obviously Perez too, seem to get the whole thing a bit confused. Igbon5 says, well, it's a bit tough here. He says, Daniel's not good enough or worthy enough to get that prime drive again. It's being a bit hard on him. Though. Let's forgive and forget. He made that mistake of leaving. Everybody told him it was a mistake, I think. But he made the mistake. Now he's back and he's smiling and having a laugh. He was used a lot in Australia in all the pre-race advertising. The big pictures of Daniel as he's driving along the motorway. Welcome home, and he's in his Red Bull kit. And it was for a mobile phone company, but I'm not sure It'd be interesting. I imagine Daniel's pretty relaxed right now. He's probably on the phone winding up all the Mexican press, getting him to say what they're saying and winding up Checo. Knowing Daniel, no, not knowing Daniel. Quite a cool thing to be doing, probably having a laugh about it. Boom Shanka Boom says, good afternoon, Peter. Good afternoon to you. Turbo GSR. How close was engine power in 2021? I've read a lot of different things from it. It was close between Merck and Honda. Yeah, well, we talked about that, didn't we? I think maybe this is me just coming at the same question, but I think they were very close, very, very close. CS, you talk about Charles, Max and Lewis, the best drivers in Formula One at the moment. What separates them from Alonso? Can he bridge that gap in another Alonso ways when fighting for a championship? That's a good question. For me, one fundamental difference between Alonso and Hamilton was evident in 2007 when they were at McLaren at the Canadian Grand Prix when Lewis took the pole, because Fernando on his lap jinxed slightly under braking in the end of qualifying on his quickest lap and ran slightly wide at the hairpin and slightly missed the pole. And that to me was, wow, that's interesting. I wonder why that happened. And afterwards, Fernando was saying to the engineers, I just don't like these carbon industry brakes. It makes the car move too much. I want to be on Hitcos. That's what I'm used to. Much softer feel to them. And I remember thinking at the time, that's a bit weird, isn't it? Because you'd imagine Fernando, with all his experience, would be able to adapt, obviously, to brakes that Lewis is using perfectly. And they did actually change to Hitco brakes on Fernando's car. And he was super quick. If you think of races like Monza, he was fabulous. Got to get this exposure back. It's so annoying. I hope it's not too annoying for anybody else, but for me, it's incredibly irritating. And I think actually what happened there was that was highlighting a difference between Fernando's initial brake pedal feel or application and Lewis's initial brake pedal application. And Lewis, even in 2007, was incredibly good from high-speed braking, just perfect use of the brake pedal, giving it exactly the right pressure at exactly the same rate. It's not just slamming on the brakes at all. And Fernando wasn't doing that because he'd grown up with Hitco. And I think that's probably still the case now. I think it is still the case because we saw that in Bahrain on his qualifying lap in Bahrain. He just braked a fraction too hard, fraction too late into the first corner and ran a little bit wide, and that was the qualifying lap gone. So I think it's that. And I think Fernando still has a much more aggressive, if that's the right word, direct initial steering input compared with Charles, Lewis and Max. He does that rather than that. And you can see that head on into Copse at Silverstone. If you watch Fernando head on, the car's always doing that. And he's always driven like that. And when he's got a great car with a great balance and great front end and great tyres, as per Renault when he was winning his World Championships, I think that's fine. And what Fernando has, which I don't think Lewis, Max or Charles have, and I think it's what makes Fernando so brilliant in one respect, and that is this ability to just manage the car. Once he's got that jolt and he's loosened it, that's what he needs to feel, and then he's just this incredible pianist just balancing the car towards the apex. And slightly longer corner as well, but that's not really a disadvantage. It's not that much longer. And that's what he does so well. But he can only do that if he jolts the car. And the problem is that jolting, when he's on a degraded set of tyres or he's got understeer or the compound's not really commensurate with the ambient temperature, which is often the case with the Pirellis, or the track temperature, that actually slows it all down. Whereas a Max, a Charles and a Lewis can massage the car still to be at the absolute perfection in terms of maximizing what the tire can do, because they have other tools that they use in the way they come out of the brake pedal pressure, the way they can load up the steering against that decreased brake pedal pressure, and the rate of inputs they have, whether they're using their footwork or their handwork. Everything is in perfect harmony with the balance and the feel and the movement of the car, whereas Fernando always does that, regardless really of what the car wants to take. So I think those two things, the initial brake and the initial steering, are what separate Fernando from those top three. And I don't think he'll ever change. If he was going to change, it would have been in 07, when he would have said to himself, probably not to the public, but said to himself, for the first time in my life, I've got a really quick teammate. And it's interesting because I've never really had to think about my driving, but there's a couple of things that Lewis does slightly better than me. But I'll have him. I'll work on that, and I'll have him by the end of the year. I think if he'd said that to himself, he probably would have maybe started to work a little bit on his braking and maybe even his steering. But because he's Fernando and he's won 2 world championships by then, he just assumed, like Sebastian Vettel at Red Bull, I guess, when he left, or even Daniel, that because he wasn't beating Lewis, there had to be something wrong with the car. There had to be a way the team were giving him an inferior car, which was wrong in my view. I don't think that was the case. I'm sure today, even today, Fernando thinks that, but I don't think that's the case. So there we go. So here we go. Seem to have frozen a bit with the old chat now. That's why I'm gone into a bit of a hiatus here. I can read what's here. Oh, okay, it's moving again. Just getting used to the whole YouTube pace. You're dark. Yeah, I know I'm dark. It's very annoying. Okay, so these questions I haven't seen. Where is it? Wow. There's a lot of questions actually. I haven't to come. I've only got about another 20 minutes, I think. Oof. It's a lot. Wow. I can't believe how many questions there are. Thank you very much, everyone that's joining this live stream. And you know what? I'm probably not going to get through everything. So at this point, I'm gone dark again. Come forward, and I'll say, if I haven't, we'll be doing more live streams. So don't worry. You know, you can have another go at me. I can't believe how many. I'm going up and up and up, and I still haven't got to the last question I was dealing with. Okay, I mean, I'm just going to go from here. It looks like Anthony, FA18. Hi, Peter, FA18. Hi, Peter. What do you think will happen to Honda in 26? I'd be surprised if they come back with their own team. Actually, I mean, they've done their own team, and then they thought, nah, that's not for us. We'll just do engines, and it's worked for them pretty well. So if they're going to come back, I can't imagine they wouldn't do that just as a supplier, but. If they come back doing their own team, well, it'll be interesting, won't it? Max says Leclerc is the fastest driver. Well, you know, I think he's as quick as anybody out there. I wouldn't have said he's faster than Max or Lewis or George or even possibly, he's probably quicker than Lando, yeah. But I think he's one of the top 3 drivers in the world. He is extremely good and really, really good guy. So Andre FS says, Perez's only chance against Max is to be absolutely consistent, as Rosberg was in 2016. Keep scoring seconds and those occasional wins and count on Max having issues to outscore him at the end. 100% right. Just play the role that you know is there for you to play and enjoy being in a great racing car, having great racing team people around you all the time. But don't make a big fuss and don't make any waves. That's great advice. Sagenev, getting rid of Massey was a mistake. Now there's an interesting point. We're talking about Michael Massey, who of course was the man who made that decision to bring in the safety car in Abu Dhabi 21. He was in Melbourne, didn't actually get a chance to speak, but we said hi a couple of times. And you're not the first person to have said, wow, you know, at least we had a guy who just made decisions and got on with it and basically understood things. Okay, Abu Dhabi was a big mistake at the wrong time. Interesting, isn't it? You know, he's there, he's still there or thereabouts. I can't imagine, though, that he will come back. I don't imagine Mercedes and Lewis would ever countenance that, to be honest, but maybe they will. Rallycross, Craig. Hi Peter, Aston Martin. Have they got everything in place behind the scenes to grow to be one of the top teams? Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the next car, because this car is an Andy Green car, and Andy Green is from the Force India days, and before that, really good guy. He's now been moved to another part of the Aston Martin empire. Quite strangely, I think, but this is to, to make way for Dan Fellows and his team of people that he's bringing with him, Red Bull guy. And so this next car, the 24 car, will be a Dan Fellows car. And that's when we'll see it. I mean, there's no way it'll be a slow car, because they'll be developing it from this. Plus, they'll have their own new input. So it'll be a good car. Very good new facility, for sure. Very good people there still. Andy Stevenson, Tom McCullough, all that lot still there. Really good guys. And a lot of good new people as well that they've recruited. About the only thing you could say is politically and longevity. Talk about the politics and the longevity of the team, because it is Lawrence Stroll's baby, if you like. And would it continue if Lance wasn't racing? Would it continue if Lawrence Stroll wasn't able to, be a part of it anymore? Would it continue in the way Red Bull has continued in the aftermath of Dietrich Mateschitz? That's the question, I think, about evolving into a great team, is the longevity of it. And that's why I talk about that, because in the short term, there's also the political, if there's a political barrier, if you like, or some sort of obstacle between, say, Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, in the Ferrari system, and a great driver like Leclerc often having issues with the way Ferrari operate as a team, then for sure there are political issues at Aston Martin as well, because Lawrence Stroll has his own idea of doing things. A lot of it is around how he wants his son to perform. And then you've got Fernando Alonso, who's not afraid to say what he thinks. And I'm only plucking something out of the sky here, but if Lawrence Stroll was to start insisting that all the key new bits of the car went to Lance and not to Fernando, for example, how would Fernando respond to that? Everybody's talking about Perez. Is he getting, all the best bits at Red Bull? Well, is Fernando always going to get the best bits at Aston Martin? And if he isn't, what's that going to do to the politics within the team? I think that's the most significant question mark about Aston Martin. And I don't think any of the people there are in a position to do anything about that, because it's the father's team, and he will do exactly what he wants, really, and tell them. Fizz IX says, indeed, the penalty was absurd. And Jose B, will Lewis win an 8th championship? Well, as I said in my video after the Australian Grand Prix, I think the best thing we saw in many ways was how that race finished under the safety car, and it wasn't actually a horrendous thing that everybody had predicted. And had Abu Dhabi 21 finished behind the safety car, it would have been an emotional, amazing moment of Lewis clinching that 8th world title, waving to the crowd as he did so. Will that opportunity ever come again? I doubt it. I very much doubt it. I love to see it, but I very much doubt it. I don't think it will. I don't see how it will, because even if Mercedes have a great car, Lewis has got to beat Max and then George Russell in the other Mercedes, and probably a Ferrari or two. The odds of doing that pretty small these days now. Wolf91 says, Lewis is still the best driver in the sport. Well, nice to hear you say that. I mean, to me, there's nobody better than Lewis. I think Max right now, you'd have to say, is probably very, very near him, probably alongside him in terms of all-round talent. But Lewis has also ticked the box in another couple of areas, which is what happens if you've got a terrible car and you've got a mega quick teammate, young dog in the other car. How will you drive then if you've got 6 world championships or 7? And he's ticked that box as well. And that's nobody in the sport, nobody in the history of the sport has had to go through that test as a multi-world champion, then to blow away an incredibly quick, not blow away at all, to race against an incredibly quick young teammate in an inferior car and still be motivated enough to take the race to him. Yeah, of course, George is going to beat him probably more than 50% of the time, but why wouldn't he? You know, he's got nothing to lose. He's super quick, and Lewis has got everything to lose, and he's got a massive amount of road dust behind him, and he's still motivated. Incredible. Itaza Malik says the Massey termination was great. Oh, well, no mincing of words there. Edwin Lawrence says, Peter, I'd love to see South Africa back on the calendar. How likely is that to happen? And if so, what about a hypothetical January Grand Prix as in the 60s? Well, I spent most of the Australian Grand Prix bemoaning the fact that Australia isn't the last round of the championship, because I think it's a great place to have the finale, because everybody then goes on a nice holiday in Australia, and it's a great time of the year. You know, that time of the year in Australia is beautiful, climate-wise, and other sport-wise as well. It's a great atmosphere in Australia at that point. I'm not sure about March, you know, May, whenever it was, end of March. Slightly different atmosphere in Melbourne at that time. So that was one point. And then, yeah, in terms of starting the year, that certainly had a ring about it. That early January the 1st even, South African Grand Prix. What a nice thing. I would love to see it. I would love to see Formula One again in South Africa. I'd love to see it at the start of the year, opening round of the championship. Can't think of anything better. I'd love to see 3 weeks of tyre testing at Kyalami beforehand. And yeah, and of all the messages Formula One's sending out now in terms of its social responsibility, wouldn't it be appropriate to have South Africa on the calendar? But it all comes down to money, guess what? And so the odds of it happening, sadly, I don't think South Africa are going to be able to afford what it costs to have a round of the World Championship, in the immediate future anyway. The way Formula One is structured at the moment, let's phrase it like that. Algeria Solitary Man says Max is the best right now. Okay, thank you for your opinion. Turbo GSR, Sargent punted, think it was De Vries pretty bad, but Sargent got no penalty. I also don't agree with the science penalty. Yeah, well, good point. Yeah, I mean, the science penalty was not only incongruous in terms of what other drivers had done that weekend and indeed in other weekends, but it was also incongruous in the light of being on the inside, and it's the guy on the outside that gets away with it. I still think that whole business of, oh, if you're on the outside now, you've got the right to overtake. If you're slightly ahead, the guy on the inside has to brake and let you around. That's not motor racing. I'm sorry, that is not motor racing. If you're on the inside, even if the guy on the outside is half a length or even a car's length ahead of you, it's still your corner. The guy on the outside does not turn in until the guy on the inside has decided that it's the moment to turn in. And that's motor racing. And if you play around with that, you come out with what we've got now, a complete mess of absurd penalties that should not be applied. And that's where it all started. It was the wrong penalty at the wrong time, and then it was the wrong size of penalty. If they had to give something instantly, knee-jerk penalty, at least they could have just given them a grid penalty at the next race, not a 5-second penalty behind a safety car. Absolutely criminal, really. Totally wrong. Emmanuel Petre. I thought you were going to say Manuel Pirro there, but no, Manuel Petre. But I'm sure you're just as august as Manuel Pirro. Massey is a hero as he died. Massey is a hero. He died for the greatest championship finish that will ever be. Well, I think he made the biggest mistake at the worst possible time. That's only my view. S00% Acuity says Max equals greatest of all time. Okay. I'm not sure Bernd Rosemeyer would agree with that, or indeed Tazio Nuvolari, or Sterling Moss, or Jim Clark, or any of those people. But I'm sure some of them would have said he's very, very good. CBD comedian with me. Come dine with me. Sorry, CBD. Come dine with me. Syllabo. Got there. For red flags, all we need was a 1 in Abu Dhabi 21 for fairness. Well, yeah. If only we can go back in time. Lighting is nice. Thank you very much, apart from going in and out. I work on the lighting a bit. I pride myself on the, trying to put the stuff together so that it works even when I'm on the road. But I've never had these issues before with the exposure. I'm just going to get it sorted next one, so don't hold it against me. Bullpit2 says, Max is indeed the best driver ever. Well, but Bullpit2, were you on the inside of the fast downhill S's at Rouen in 1957 when Fangio was four-wheel drifting a 250F Maserati? Max has the best car. Well, there's no doubt about that. That's from Furious Wolf 777 Voodoo. Alex Horn, Peter, do you really think that after seeing the entire 21 season, Checo or his management are able to get in Max's head? The guy doesn't care. He moves on and lets his driving do the talk. Well, exactly. Exactly. But that's why I would be very subtle. I'd be very subtle, because the only thing that's in Max's head probably is, why did I get beaten by Perez at Monaco? He must have done something in qualifying, must have crashed, whatever he's thinking. So it's obviously in his head. So well, if I was Max, I'd just say, after Saudi Arabia, I would have said, yeah, brilliant, great team, love the car, Max is fabulous, what a great teammate, can't wait to see how we go at Monaco. That's all I would have said. Keep it simple, subtle. Spanish and English. So there we go. Bear Thomas says, oh, this is a good one. Put Lando in the Red Bull, then we'll find out how good Max is. I know a guy that would agree with that 100%, and his name is Lando Norris. I was chatting to Lando a lot about his golf, actually. He's really good. He's really good. And we were saying, I said rather condescendingly, there's no doubt that there's a lot of similarity between what you have as a talent as a racing driver and what you have as a talent as a golfer. And he totally got it and agreed with me immediately that there are a lot of similarities between the two in terms of patience, timing, rhythm, and generally your mental approach of how you prepare for a round or a race. And it was really good. I think I firmly believe that. Rob B says, you are wrong, Peter, about the science incident. The mileage and lap did count. They had to go around to the pit. The order was reshuffled due to not getting past the first sector, but mileage and lap counted. Okay, I take your point. But if you're going to, the mileage and the lap count, if you're going to do that, you either don't reinstate the two Aston Martins or you do reinstate science. You can't have both. Sorry. Simple as that. This is part show, part race, part sport, part business. And, you can't have one without the other. And the point, of course, is that the penalty was ridiculous. That is the point. And it should have been a grid penalty at the next race. As per, I think I said at the time, as per Lance Stroll, US Grand Prix 2022. Algeria solitary man, yeah, we've done that one. Nico to Red Bull, might let him get a podium at last. MDM never dies. Yeah, well, he's had a pole, of course, Podium would be nice. He's good, isn't he, Nico Hulkenberg? He's a good bloke as well. And he actually is very humble as well, which is nice. You don't actually hear or see that very often in the Formula One world. So yeah, we're talking about Lando to Red Bull, and we're thinking Max would smoke Lando. I don't know, maybe, probably over one lap, but not necessarily over the race, I think. Cabelli Cello says, do you think the roles have reversed with Lewis and Max thinking about Australia 2023, turn 3, turn 4? Yeah, I mean, can you do that these days? Do you start thinking about, isn't it ironic what's going on here? Lewis, the great pass on Max. I mean, to my mind, the reading from that was, obviously in 21, Max was getting very wound up by, I like to think, only Helmut Marko and his dad, but I don't think it would have been anybody else at Red Bull, along the lines of, be aggressive, because if you two guys collide, and you're both out, it's to your advantage, Max. So don't be afraid to be aggressive in traffic. And we saw that at its peak, I think, in Saudi Arabia. I think my reading of what happened, Lewis's pass on the opening lap in Melbourne was, that is the real Max Verstappen, and he's very, very good now of staying out of trouble. The Niki Lauda thing of not allowing anybody to hit your car, protecting your car and reading what's going on. Just as Lewis read really well in 21 what Max was trying to do, and very often avoided the shunt that was looked to be inevitable. So in that sense, I suppose it was reversed things, yeah, but slightly different context. But yeah, I mean, the whole art of staying out of trouble is a real art, and Max displayed that, I think, very well on that opening lap in Melbourne. Particularly with Perez out, from Red Bull's point of view, there's quite a lot of pressure on him to make sure he had a clean opening lap, and he didn't make a great start. And the Mercs were all over him, so it wasn't easy for him just to bring a car through at the end of the lap without any damage on it, but he did, and that's how he won the race. Very good. Does Ricciardo want to be a wingman though? Has his attitude changed? Yeah, I'm sure Ricciardo does. This is Turbo GS. I think Ricciardo does want to be a wingman because he knows, because he's got a brain, that if he's a wingman in a very good car, being a wingman in a mid-range team, that's something else. Wingman at Red Bull, an RB19, you're going to win races. You're going to get a lot of podium finishes. So yeah, why? And then one day, who knows? Max may not race it, may go to Ferrari or whatever, and then Daniel's in good shape. So yeah, of course, he would want to be a wingman, and I don't think he would even hesitate if he was asked to be Max's wingman at Red Bull. I was going to put again at the end there, but I better not say that because it's a bit too contentious. Adam Wilabinski. Peter, who do you think will fill Lewis's seat when it's time? I imagine it'll be a new second driver type. Can't imagine who will do that job for them of the young guns. Well, on the basis that they were unafraid to hire George and not listen to Lewis, who wanted to keep Valtteri because they wanted the best possible young, fast driver they could get in the other car, for the sake of the Constructors' Championship, I guess. On that basis, you'd have to say, well, they'll still try and get the best possible driver they can get, would they not? So I guess they would be looking at Leclerc and possibly Lando, I would think. I mean, I wouldn't put Leclerc alongside George. I don't think I'll put Lando alongside George either. And I think there are other guys that you could get. Nico, we've been talking about Nico all the time, but I don't imagine, on the basis that they've shown us what their approach is, i.e. the best possible driver we can get, then they will go for somebody super quick. Oh, this is not very nice. 100% Actuity. Lando equals the most overrated driver ever. Well, I suppose that what you mean by overrated. If you think people have been saying this guy's as good as Jim Clark, and he's at least as good as Jim, at least better than Jim Clark, and at least as good as Lewis, Max and Charles, then he is overrated, I agree. But if you're saying that Lando, very polished, very good Grand Prix driver, quite capable of winning Grand Prix in the right car, he's not overrated at all. That is what he is. Sorry, I don't know whether, it depends on what you mean by overrated. Daniel Gould again says, what everyone is missing about Daniel Ricciardo is that he's been employed to be the face of Ford worldwide as per the new agreement with Red Bull, and not to be a racing driver. Well, yeah, but he is a third driver technically, and he is therefore the driver that Red Bull would use if either Max or Perez were not available to race. And equally, Perez may not be available to race if Red Bull decide they don't want him anymore. That's what everyone's talking about. But yeah, you're quite right that he's a great face for Ford and great face for all the sponsors, indeed, and they all love him. Campbell Logan Racing, wow, says that's a good name. I wonder if that's any of my friends that I used to know. I mean, probably not. Why is Max so good? Well, he is one of these greatly gifted drivers with incredibly supple inputs, hand and foot inputs that are, I've used that phrase, in harmony, commensurate with the movement of the car. He anticipates what the car is going to do. He feels the surface of the road. He creates areas where he knows that he needs the car to be square or flat, where when he's got a change of direction coming or he's braking, in the middle of a change of direction. Or he just creates these little moments where he gets the car to be as unloaded as possible. And everything is very supple and very, very light in touch. Short corners, very difficult to fault him in any respect, actually. He's got all the qualities of all the great drivers, and he has the ability, because of all that, when you watch a max lap, to make the car look as if it's more or less on rails. There'll be moments when you just see perfect drifts, but generally it'll look as if it's completely on rails, and very rarely will you see it spiking or being out of line. Of course he makes mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, and he often locks up, and particularly on Fridays, and goes off and does things, and in traffic occasionally obviously you have issues as well. But in terms of the lap, that is how he drives, and that is why all the great drivers generally always make it look pretty simple. And when people are watching them, they say, wow, his car's so good, anybody could win in that car. And usually it's only because that driver is making that car look that good. But in my experience, which goes back quite a long time now, that is how most of the great drivers always make it look. I say Jochen Rindt wouldn't necessarily have. I mean, Jim Clark was sliding like crazy in the 65 International at Warwick Farm in the Lotus 32B 2.5 litre Climax. Really nice racing car with a lot of power. But he was sliding everywhere. But he was sliding everywhere because he lost third gear on the fourth lap of the race, and he was taking a third gear corner in fourth, for example, and it was just the back end was doing this, and he was having to drift it and just balance the throttle in fourth gear instead of third. But it takes things like that to make guys like Clark or Verstappen look in any way, different from just being on rails. So Nutella Bra says Lando is the closest to Max. There's a big disparity between what people think of Lando Norris's ability. Poor Lando, we need him to come in and talk. Actually, I was talking to the McLaren guys the other day, and they said, oh yeah, Lando's quite into that sort of thing. So who knows, we might get him in. But don't say anything nasty to him. If we get him on the show, I don't want anybody saying, oh, you're overrated. What's the point of that? 8 times, I think he's saying Sir Lewis 8 times. Yeah, he deserves 8 championships. I'll tell you what, I've been going for 2 hours now. And I think, it says 52, okay, I'll have a bit more. It says 52 because, 1 hour 52, because this is the second stream. And as I said, 2 hours on the stream. I'll just do the last 8 minutes of this one, just to be neat and tidy. Furious Wolf says, Red Bull Beast engine. I mean, best engine, I think you mean, Honda. Yeah, well, everything's good on that car, that RB19. They'd probably be winning races with a Renault engine, I would imagine, but it's only me. Ricardo was awful for 2 years in a row. Yeah, John Dawson Bowman Christian says that. He was, but that's because he believed that he was getting shafted at Red Bull and that he'd go to another team and really show his talent against drivers like Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. And of course, those guys are not slow. And anyway, Daniel went into a little bit of a sort of cruise mode because he had so much money all of a sudden, and he was Daniel Ricciardo, and he imagined, a bit like Vettel going to Ferrari, that things would just sort of magically happen and he'd win races, or what, I don't know, probably what he thought. And I think a bit of a shock when he realised that wasn't going to happen. And he had a few things I don't know, today he thinks, I've got some things I need to improve about my driving. He probably doesn't, because he'd still think, well, I used to win Grand Prix without problems, so I can still do it in the future. Probably what he thinks. Conor Mayer. Yeah, I know. What's going on with the lighting, Peter? I keep saying it's a ridiculous exposure thing on this camera. It keeps going in and out. It's the auto exposure thing. And I can't adjust it midstream because I'm live streaming. So nobody here to help. I know. Thank you very much for pointing out something I've known from the start, Conor Mayer, just winding me up now. I know it's terrible, and I know it'll be better next time, right? Well, I promise it'll be better anyway. Habs, does McLaren need to become a works team to win a constructors title? How successful have customer teams been in history? Well, customer teams have been incredibly successful in history. Just look at Tyrrell. That's a very good example. Lotus, you could argue, Honda engine customer, weren't slow with Ayrton Senna. McLaren with Honda, Does McLaren need to become a works team? No, I don't think it does. I think Aston Martin have shown that if you're a customer Mercedes engine team, you're there or thereabouts, give or take a little bit of luck, you're going to win a Grand Prix, you're going to be on the podium. McLaren just not done a good job over the winter. They don't have a great car. That's the problem. And that's nothing to do with being a customer Mercedes team. That's to do with not having a great car. I think if they tried to do their own engine, it would make things even worse, to be honest, because they've got too much going on. They're trying to get their new wind tunnel working. They've been using the Cologne tunnel in Germany. They've got Oscar Piastri winding up Lando. There's lots going on there. The last thing I need to be doing is an engine as well, I think. So there we are. Where are we? Karma in Babylon. There's a nice name. Rosberg aced the new regs for starts quicker than Lewis in 2016. Beat him off the line, gained track position, and hence first call on strategy. Nico was smart in 2016. Yeah, he was. He did a very good job. And I think Lewis had his eye off the ball a little bit, off the technology ball. And I think Lewis, and this is one of the great things about Lewis, I think Lewis that winter gave himself a really good talking to and upped his work quotient, for want of a better phrase, and worked really hard in the sim and various other things he could do, understanding the car, how to do things better, how to use the technology, and he became a better driver as a result. I think Lewis has become a better driver every year of his career, and there aren't many drivers about which you can say that, and that's a very good example. That 2016 was a shock to him. Of course, there were moments when he felt, Lewis, that Nico had been a little bit underhand, I suspect, but overall, 2016 was a wake-up call for Lewis, and he did a good job. And yeah, that's not what Fernando did when he got beaten by Lewis in 07. I say beaten, he got shocked by Lewis. This young guy had never raced Formula One before. Ryan Jason, well, this is good of you, Ryan. Daniel would do a better job than Yuki Tsunoda. Well, you're talking about Daniel Ricciardo, the great Daniel Ricciardo here. I'd like to think. Imagine if Daniel saw that. He'd think, yeah, of course I would, mate. Yeah, Yuki who? Yeah. What do we think about Yuki Tsunoda? I've got a lot of time for this Iwasa, who's winning races for Dams in F2. Doing a good job, isn't he? Yuki drove well in Melbourne, raced well anyway, and I think he qualified well too, top 10, and he needs to continue doing that because Iwasa is not slow, and he will definitely have some sort of Honda assistance, I would have thought, into Formula One. Super Acuity says Max lines in a totally pro sim and has for years. That's why he's the best. Lewis is feel and art. Max is art and science, and that's why Max is the greatest. Well, it's interesting. I don't know where. I think Max might be more science than Lewis. Yeah, possibly. But I think Max is also art, isn't he? That's what makes him very good. And as I was just saying, I don't think Lewis is that short on the science side now. I'm sure he's not very interested in it, but he's done a very good job of keeping up with it. So we got Alien Race. How do you think Max is the most talented Formula One driver ever? Well, I've talked about Max. Darwin Lee says Max drives for Adrian Newey, who has 7 different drivers who've won World Drivers' Championship, 3 with multiple titles. None have won after they left his designs. Yeah, probably. Well, yeah, we all know how good Adrian is. Yeah, let's hear it for Adrian Newey. I mean, he is the star, isn't he? He's won more championships and more races than any Formula One person in the history of the sport, by a mile. Good on him. Big fan of Adrian Newey. Max says, will Massa win the 08 title? Quite sure what you mean by that. You probably mean if we go back in time, should Massa have won it? It wasn't just, Singapore was a mess, wasn't it? He drove really well though, Felipe, that year. And he did everything he needed to do in Brazil, except clinch the championship. Yeah, no, I look like a criminal making confessions when the dark goes on. Sorry about that, Donald Trump. No, not a criminal, just going dark, being, whatever, processed. Rob Graham, hey Peter, are drivers' helmets painted or do they use wraps? If not wraps, why not? I think they're painted. I think there's a big industry out there. And why not? I think it's because it's a nice, I think it's easier. Don't the drivers and the managers like to sort of stand over the shoulder of the artist and say, no, do it here, a bit more pink there, a bit of yellow there, green here? Isn't that what they do? Possibly they do a bit of wrapping sometimes. I would think in general the driver likes to really get involved with what he's doing with the design. I'm not a fan, like a lot of people, of all these constantly changing intricate designs that all look the same. But by the time you've got the screens there and the halo and everything else, you can barely see them anyway. So it's a bit of a moot point these days, the driver helmets. It's just so nice. When doing the exhibition, it was so nice seeing some of the older helmets and the classic unchangeable designs that, stood the test of time and still look great. We got the 2 hour mark. So because everybody's moaning now about my exposure settings, I'm going to go away and work on those, and we'll do another live stream soon. Thank you so much, everybody, for your questions. First YouTube one we've done. I think it's gone pretty well, actually, from what I can see. I don't know, in terms of live stream, what it's like, but I'm going to do more. I tell you what I would like. If people can, how are we going to do this? Give me some idea of what you think would be the best time to do a regular live stream, weekly regular live stream, bearing in mind that quite often I'm traveling on a Thursday to a race, and often I don't get back until the land of the living, until a Tuesday. Kind of narrows it down, doesn't it? And bearing in mind I'm often quite busy on a Wednesday. Anyway, let's just have your thoughts on optimum times for live streams, and it'd be interesting to know what everybody thinks from various times, parts of the world. We've chosen this one because it seemed to be not a bad time to do it before the Masters. Having said that, obviously there aren't going to be that many Sundays when we can do live streams, so I need to think about that. It'll end up probably being when I get slots available, but I'm happy to try and give the regular slot a go if it's a doable thing. So yeah, apologies for the exposure drama, and I'll get it better. Will get better. There's a lot of questions I haven't answered, so please come back and ask them again when we do more live streams. And in the meantime, have a lovely remains of the day, Easter day. See you soon. Be safe, be healthy, and take care. Thank you for watching.